pagoda, seemingly tranquil, hides horrifying secrets. A sinister young monk with glowing red eyes relentlessly chases Tuyet and Thinh through every corner of the haunted pagoda. Gradually, they uncover a horrifying truth about their past. This pagoda, destroyed in war, has become the resting place of souls unable to move on. Will they manage to escape the deadly cycle, or will they be forever trapped in the hell that is now their reality?
Horrifying haunting in the haunted pagoda, Chap 4. They ran around the corners of the pagoda, but the monk always followed their every step, never stopping. This chase was not simply about running away, but also about resisting the demon that threatened their lives every second. Tuyet and Thinh fled in despair, their emotions torn apart by panic and fear. They felt like they were sinking from one nightmare into another with no escape, and they needed to find a way to overcome the threat closing in from every corner of the pagoda. Terrified, Tuyet and Thinh didn't want to believe what they were seeing, but reality forced them to. They fled through the pagoda, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the chaotic and horrifying space. Darkness enveloped the pagoda, leaving only their rapid, frantic breaths and screams. In their desperation, the terrifying monk caught up to them, his fiery red eyes reflecting malevolence and horror. In their frantic escape, Tuyet and Thinh tripped over the steps, hitting their heads on the doorframe and falling unconscious. In the last moment before they lost consciousness, they felt suspended between reality and nightmare, with the image of the terrifying monk dominating their minds and the sound of ghostly laughter echoing through the gloomy pagoda. When Tuyet and Thinh woke up, the morning sunlight shone through the dilapidated windows. They realized they were lying amidst ruins and debris, unable to recognize their surroundings. They struggled to stand and walk out of the wreckage, eventually encountering local villagers. The villagers looked terrified and anxious as they listened to Tuyet and Thinh recount the previous night's events. The villagers began to share the story of the haunted pagoda they had just escaped. The pagoda was described as a haunted place where trapped souls and wandering demons lingered. It had witnessed tragedies and disasters during wartime. Stories passed down by the locals painted a picture of hell every time they spoke of it. During the war, the pagoda became a refuge for the people seeking peace and shelter amidst chaos and suffering. Unfortunately, safety was short-lived as the pagoda became a target for attacks. The pagoda was called 3 p.m., a time when people were usually asleep in peace and quiet. But that dreadful night was filled with terror and destruction as bombs came down, shattering everything in sight. Bombs fell from the sky, destroying everything around, and the pagoda was no exception. Explosions tore apart its walls and crushed the deity statues. The flames of war spread, consuming everything, including the innocent souls who were praying or sleeping. The deep wounds, both physical and emotional, lingered in the pagoda long after those dark days of war. Many lives were lost, and the pain, fear, and despair overwhelmed the space and time, even to this day when survivors accidentally step inside. Since then, the pagoda was no longer a place of worship but became a symbol of suffering and loss. The unrelieved sorrow and anger turned the pagoda into a haunted place, where trapped souls and despair continued to resurface. Every stone, every statue, held the stories of those who lived and died in the war's anguish, making the pagoda haunted and spreading fear and terror in the hearts of those who dared to enter. The villagers felt fortunate that Tuyet and Thinh survived, but they also sympathized with what they had gone through. The villagers led Tuyet and Thinh to the back of the ruined pagoda, where the gloomy and frightening scene began. In front of them, numerous gravestones lay scattered among the debris and rubble, filled with sorrowful and mysterious emotions. But when their eyes rested on a particular gravestone, they couldn't help but gasp in shock and fear. It belonged to the monk, the very same one they had encountered in the pagoda who had brought them such extreme terror. It was this boy, the pagoda's monk, who urged everyone to stay in their rooms at PM that night, but no one listened. A villager recounted. They complained that the shelter was cramped and dirty, and no one believed the pagoda would be bombed. So they were careless, seeing the monk's name on a gravestone. A strange and haunting feeling spread through the air. They felt that the monk was still present, even though he had long been gone, intensifying their fear more than ever. An invisible sense of dread reached out like eyes staring at them from the gravestones, like a dark warning lingering in their minds. That night, the locals warmly invited Tuyet and Thinh to stay overnight. Having endured too much fear, and now under the warm atmosphere of the families, they quickly fell asleep. However, in the middle of the night, strange noises suddenly arose. They awoke with a start. Under the dim light, the bedroom they were in suddenly felt unfamiliar. It was then they realized in horror that they were not in a villager's house but back in the haunted pagoda. Confusion overwhelmed them. They knew they were trapped in a familiar yet terrifying place, surrounded by ghostly and demonic entities, and decided they had to leave the pagoda. But as they stepped outside, they encountered the monk standing in the hallway. Haunted by the terrifying image of the monk from before, they stood frozen in place. In their hearts they thought, Are we going to die here? Tuyet and Thinh trembled as the monk approached. Just as they were about to accept their fate, the monk spoke. Don't you remember? Surprised. Tuyet and Thinh were about to ask what they were supposed to remember when the monk continued. You were travelers who sought shelter at this pagoda during the war. That night, the pagoda gates around the village were bombed. Everyone in the village, in the pagoda, including you two, perished. The two looked at each other with astonished eyes, searching for traces of the past in their foggy memories. Every evening, as the sun sets, you forget everything and enter this pagoda, caught in an endless loop. We're all trapped in a world of unrelieved memories, the monk continued. These words made the confusion in their minds clear. They felt as if they were stepping into a maze of past and present, where time was not a straight line but a loop of infinity.